Hello everyone, today we're going to be doing simplifying integers with Miss Massey Math. This is my email if you need any help, and here is my YouTube channel if you'd like to see more videos. So we are going to be working on a worksheet with covering a few of the harder problems. So before we get into these harder problems, I kind of wanted to give you guys an overview. So let's talk about adding and subtracting integers. In this case, you need to remember these rules, and if you don't, then this would be a good review for you. Always remember to take the sign of the bigger number. That's the most important thing when we are only talking about adding and subtracting integers. So let's talk examples. So here we go. So the first one, it says a positive and a positive means you have to add. Well, let's see what type of problem I'm talking about. What if you had 2 plus 3? What would we have to do? Well, this one has nothing in front of it, so therefore it's an invisible positive. This one has a plus sign in front of it, so that means it is positive. And it says here, according to our rules, when you have a positive and a positive, means you add. So we are adding these two problems. So 3 plus 2 is 5. Now we always have to take the sign of the bigger number. So you look at 2, you look at 3, which one is bigger? Well, 3 is bigger, and 3 happens to be positive. So therefore my answer is positive. You do not have to put that plus sign there or the little positive sign. You could just put a 5, and I like to circle my final answer so you know which one I'm talking about. Let's move on to the next problem. Well, what happens when you have a negative? So let's say negative 2 plus negative 3. What do we have to do? Well, according to my little cheat sheet here, when you have a negative and a negative, it means you still need to add. So let's see what we have. In front of the 2 is a negative, in front of the 3 is a negative. So we have a negative and a negative. That means we are going to add. So when we add, we get 5. But then we have to take the sign of the bigger number. Well, what's bigger, 2 or 3? 3 is bigger, and 3 happens to be negative. So your final answer is negative 5. All right, let's move right along to the next one. What happens when we have a positive and a negative number? So what about if it was 2 plus negative 3? So here you have a positive because there's nothing in front of the 2, so you know it's positive. And then 3 is negative because it has a negative right in front of it. So when you have a positive and a negative, according to our rules, that means we have to subtract. So we are subtracting in this case. So 3 minus 2 is 1. And then you take the sign of the bigger number. The bigger number in this case is 3, and 3 was negative. So our final answer is negative 1. All right, so now let's look at the last one. The last one is pretty simple because it's just like the other ones that we've been doing, the one we did above. So you have a positive and a negative. And so for example, let's say we had negative 2 plus 3. So let's look at our problems. Our first number is negative. Our second number, what's in front? A positive. So when you have a negative and a positive, that means we have to subtract. So we are subtracting. So 3 minus 2 is 1. And now take the sign of the bigger number. So the bigger number in this case is 3, and it's positive. So now I want you to take a look at all our answers because all of them are very different. So on our first problem, we had to add, we had 2 positives, and we got a positive 5. On our second example, we had 2 negatives, we had to add again, and we got a negative 5 this time. And with this one was a negative and a positive, we had to subtract, and we got a negative 1. And this one, it was a negative and a positive, so they were switched around. So notice how it makes a difference. Still subtract just like we did before, but here we got a positive 1. So I think it's very important that you guys remember that you have to take the sign of the bigger number. If you do not, then that is where it messes up. All right, so we're gonna move on after this to our next problem. So we are going to work on multiplying and dividing integers. So with multiplying and dividing integers, some students get very confused, but the rules are not the same as adding and subtracting. So please keep that in mind. So for this one, I'll be going over all the differences. So multiplying and dividing, same rules for these two, and adding and subtracting refer to the other problems before. So this one I think is a little bit simpler and students seem to get it easier. So it says here, when there's a positive and a positive, that means your answer is going to be positive. What does that mean? Well, if we had 2 times 3, this one is positive, this one is positive, so it's telling me my answer is going to be positive. So I put a little plus sign there so I don't forget. Now I multiply like normal. So 2 times 3 is 6. So my final answer is positive 6. Let's go on to the next example. Here you have a negative and a negative. It still gives you a positive is what this rule is telling you. So if you have negative 2 times negative 3, you have a negative and a negative. So my answer is still going to be positive. So I put a plus, and then you multiply like normal. So 2 times 3 is 6. So my final answer is still positive. So notice that these were positives and it gave me a positive answer, and these were negatives and they still gave me a positive answer. So you have to follow the rules carefully. All right, let's go on to the next example. What about if you have a positive and a negative? So what if we had 2 times negative 3? Well, this one is positive, this one is negative. And according to my rules, that means my answer is going to be negative. So I put a little negative sign, and now I multiply like normal. So 2 times 3 is 6. So I ended up with a negative 6. Pretty simple stuff. All right, let's go on to the last example. So if you have a negative and a positive, you are going to get a negative. So a lot like the one before, just a little different. So what about if I had negative 2 times positive 3? So you can have a negative and a positive. So my answer means it's going to be negative. So I'm going to make sure I put a negative there. Then I just multiply like normal. So 2 times 3 is 6. So I end up with a negative 6. Now, where everybody messes up is they think they take the sign of the bigger number. But if you notice, I did not say take the sign of the bigger number in any of these cases. So I kind of made a note of that at the bottom. So make sure you put that into your notes. Do not take the sign of the bigger number when you are multiplying and dividing only. So obviously adding and subtracting would be a different case. All right, so now we are going to go back to our original problem. We're going to talk about on level, some problems on level. So here we go. This is a more complicated problem. I gave you just the basics reviews in the first ones that we did, but we did not do one of these, which is more complicated. So if we do not remember, I'm going to do a quick review on this problem. So here, whenever you have a negative and a negative next to each other, it always equals a positive. But notice that that 15 in the beginning has a negative. We do not change that. That stays negative. So our new problem became negative 15 plus 3. So the 15 is negative and the 3 is positive. So according to my rules, it's a negative and a positive. Let's go ahead and go back to our little sheet, our little cheat sheet, to see if we can remember what the rules were. So for instance, when you have a negative and a positive, you have to subtract. So it says subtraction. So we're going to go back to here. So that means I need to subtract. So I'm going to write subtraction here so I don't forget. And then we are going to take the sign of the bigger number. Which one is bigger? The 15, and it is negative. So negative is going to be my final answer. And 15 plus 3, which is, subtraction. So 15 minus 3, we got 12. So our final answer was a negative 12. So that was easy to go back to our little cheat sheet so we can remember the rules. But one of the rules that I didn't say in our cheat sheet, which you should add, is whenever you have a negative and a negative, make sure you change it to a positive. So they have to be next to each other. So another example of this could be if you see something like this. So just remember that whenever there are two negatives next to each other, they turn to positive. So it becomes 5 plus 3, and then you can do the problem like normal. All right, so let's move on to our next problem. This says multiplying integers. So if you didn't know, whenever you have something next to parentheses like that, that means you need to multiply. So in this case, it's basically saying 6 times -7. So if you don't remember the rules, again, refer back to our multiplication examples that we did, and we are talking about a positive and a negative. So if you go over here, a positive and a negative means we need to subtract. So we are subtracting in this case. So now let's go back to our problem. We know we need to subtract, so we're going to write, oh no, it's not subtraction, sorry. It's you take the sign of the subtraction sign. So for instance, in here, we were doing multiplying and dividing now. So you had a positive and a negative. That means my final answer is going to be a subtraction symbol, sorry. So going back over here, so that means it's going to be a minus sign. So I am going to just write my equal sign and put a little negative there so I don't forget. Now you just have to multiply like normal. So you have 6 times 7, and that equals 42. So your final answer is -42. So remember, when multiplying and dividing, you just multiply or you divide like normal. With subtracting and adding, you need to take the sign of the bigger number. So now that we're ready for that, let's look at the examples below and see if we're ready to do some of these examples. If you like, you can pause the video so you can do the 4 examples on the bottom, and I will be reviewing them in the next few steps. All right, so here we go. Let's go on to the first one. So the first one you are looking at, you want to make sure that you check what our symbols are. So let's look at what we have in front of us. So we have a, let me move it up a little bit so it's easier for us to look at. Okay, so here we go. 24, look in front of it. There's no symbol, therefore it is a positive. The 81, what's in front of it? A negative. So according to our rules, a negative and a positive means that we have to subtract. So if we are subtracting, we're going to end up with 57. But we always need to take the sign of the bigger number. Well, in this case, the 81 was the bigger number, not 24, and it's a negative. So we are going to put -57. Awesome. Now let's look at the next one, number 3. You have a parentheses right next to it, so you know that that means multiplication. We have a negative and a negative in multiplication, so we know our final answer is actually going to be a positive. So I like to put equal sign and put a plus so I don't forget. Then you just multiply like normal. So 5 times 8 is 40. So your final answer is 40. Awesome. All right, let's go on to the next problem. Here was a lot like the one we did up here. So remember, whenever you have 2 negatives next to each other, that means you have to make it positive. So you have 37 plus 16. So in this case, they're both positive now. So this one is positive and this one is positive. So that means we just add. So when we add them together, we get 53. And you take the sign of the bigger number. 37 is bigger and it's positive, so it's going to be a positive 53. All right, let's go on to the last one. So again, this is parentheses next to a number, so therefore it is multiplication. So all it is saying is -4 times 11. So we have a negative and the 11 is a positive. So when you have a negative and a positive, that means your final answer is going to be negative. So 4 times 11 and you get 44. So your final answer is -44. Thank you so much for joining me today for Math with Massey and doing simplifying integers. If you need any extra help, there are more videos on my YouTube channel. Thank you.